My grandfather's will left me a single, ancient key, while my sister inherited an empire. They had no idea that key unlocked a truth that would unravel our family's entire world. The air in Mr. Abernathy's office was stale, thick with the scent of old paper and lemon polish. It was the kind of room where lives were neatly folded up and filed away in manila folders. My own life felt like it was about to be crammed into a very small, very dusty one. Across the polished mahogany table, my sister Amelia sat with a posture so perfect it looked painful. Her expression was a carefully curated mask of solemn grief, but I could see the eager glint in her eyes. She'd been practicing that look in the mirror for weeks. My parents sat beside her, a pair of bookends propping up their golden child, their faces etched with a more genuine, if shallow, sorrow. And then there was me. I was just there. An afterthought in a cheap suit. Grandpa always used to say I was the dreamer and Amelia was the schemer. He'd say it with a wink, ruffling my hair, but I never understood the gravity of his words until that day. Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the suffocating silence. He adjusted his spectacles and picked up the thick document that held all of our futures. We are gathered to execute the last will and testament of Mr. Alistair Finch, he began, his voice a dry monotone. My stomach clenched. He droned on through the initial bequests, a small sum to his long-serving gardener, a collection of first-edition novels to the local library. My heart pounded a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I wasn't expecting much. Amelia was the one who had followed Grandpa into the family business, who had schmoozed his investors and memorized stock portfolios. I was the one who sat with him on the porch, listening to his stories about the war, or helped him in his workshop, learning how to mend old clocks. We had a different kind of currency, Grandpa and I. One of time, and stories, and shared silence. I just hoped he'd left me something that reflected that, maybe his old tools, or his collection of maps, something that held a memory. To my beloved grandchildren, Mr. Abernathy read, and I leaned forward, my breath catching in my throat. I have considered my legacy with great care. He paused, looking over his glasses at each of us. To my grandson, he continued, and my gaze met his. I leave my sincere hope that he finds his own path and the strength to walk it. I also bequeath to him my collection of vinyl records in the hopes that music will continue to bring him the joy it brought me. That was it. A record collection. A nice sentiment, but it was a slap in the face. I could feel Amelia's pity radiating across the table like heat. My mother reached over and gave my hand a weak, consoling squeeze. I stared at the wood grain of the table, focusing on the intricate swirls, trying not to let the burn of humiliation show on my face. Then came the main event. As for the remainder of my estate, Mr. Abernathy announced, his voice taking on a new weight, including all properties, assets, stock holdings, and controlling interest in Finch Enterprises. I leave it, in its entirety, to my granddaughter, Amelia Finch. The room tilted. For a moment, all the air was sucked out of it. Amelia let out a small, performative gasp, her hand flying to her chest. "Oh, Grandpa," she whispered, a single perfect tear tracing a path down her cheek. My parents cooed, flanking her with proud, comforting noises. It was a masterpiece of theater. I just sat there, frozen. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was the erasure. It was the validation of every time my parents had called Amelia the responsible one and me the sensitive one. It was the cold, hard proof that all those hours with Grandpa, all those shared secrets and quiet moments, had meant nothing. He had seen me as a child to be placated with music, while he saw Amelia as the heir to his entire world. The schemer had won. The drive home was a blur of hollow condolences. "He just knew you weren't interested in business, honey," my mom said. "Amelia has the right head for it," my dad added. Amelia herself, in an act of magnanimous grace, offered to help me out if I ever needed it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. Instead, I just nodded, got out of the car, and walked up to my small apartment, the weight of my useless record collection feeling heavier than any fortune. I spent the evening in a numb haze, staring at the walls. The dreamer. Grandpa had called me a dreamer. Maybe he was right. Maybe I had dreamed up a connection that was never really there. Defeated, I walked over to an old wooden chest in the corner of my room, the one thing I had taken from Grandpa's house years ago. It held my own personal treasures, old photos, letters, a pocket knife he'd given me for my 10th birthday. My fingers brushed against a small velvet pouch tucked into a side pocket. I'd almost forgotten about it. I pulled it out. Inside was a key. It wasn't a normal key. It was old, made of heavy, dark iron, with a circular head intricately carved with a small, stylized bird. A finch, our family crest. I remembered the day he gave it to me. I was about 16. He'd pressed it into my palm, his own hand warm and papery around mine. "There are lots of keys in this life, kiddo," he'd said, his blue eyes twinkling. "Keys to cars, keys to houses, keys to safes. They open things that people want. But this one is different. This one is for when the story doesn't make sense anymore. You hold on to it. You'll know when it's time." The story definitely didn't make sense anymore. I stared at the key, a fresh wave of grief and anger washing over me. What a cruel joke. A cryptic key to nothing. A final poetic bit of nonsense from the man who had left me with nothing else. I almost threw it against the wall. But then, something caught my eye. On the shaft of the key, almost invisible against the dark iron, was a tiny engraved number. It was a year, 1788. My blood ran cold. 1788. That was the year our ancestor, the first Finch in this country, had built the original family home. The old stone manor that now served as the east wing of the grand estate Amelia had just inherited. I'd spent countless hours in that wing's library, reading through old family journals. My mind raced, sifting through dusty memories, through pages of faded ink and descriptions of the house's construction. And then I remembered a specific entry written by my great-great-great-grandfather, complaining about his father's eccentricities. He wrote of a foolish, hidden vanity built into the new library's fireplace, a secret for the sake of secrets, sealed and forgotten. He even sketched it, a small drawing of the grand stone mantelpiece, and right in the center, hidden in the carved stonework of a finch, was a keyhole. I'd always thought it was just a decorative flourish. I scrambled for my laptop, my hands shaking. I pulled up photos of the estate, zooming in on the old library. There it was, the massive stone fireplace that dominated the room. I zoomed in further, my heart hammering against my chest until the pixels blurred. The resolution wasn't good enough, but I didn't need to see it clearly. I knew. The carving on the key in my hand, the stylized finch, wasn't just a family crest. It was a perfect match for the centerpiece of that mantelpiece. Grandpa hadn't left me with a useless key. He had left me a map. He had left me a challenge. The will wasn't a betrayal. It was a test. And the real inheritance wasn't in a document in a lawyer's office. It was waiting for me, locked away behind a century of stone and secrets. A fire ignited in my chest, burning away the cold fog of despair. It wasn't grief anymore, or even anger. It was purpose. For the first time since hearing the will, I felt like myself again. I was the keeper of Grandpa's stories, his confidant, the one he shared his real self with. This wasn't a game of money. It was the final chapter of a story he and I had been writing for years, and he just handed me the pen. I spent the rest of the night pacing my small apartment, the heavy iron key a talisman in my pocket. I couldn't just storm the gates of the estate. Amelia was the new queen of the castle, and she wouldn't take kindly to her dethroned brother snooping around. I needed a reason to be there, a reason to be in that specific room, alone. The next morning, I put on my best impression of a beaten dog. I called my mother, my voice quiet and hollow. I told her I was having a hard time processing everything and that I'd left a few things in the old library, a couple of photo albums and a worn copy of Moby Dick that Grandpa used to read to me. I just need to get them, I said, my voice cracking just enough. To have something of his, something that was ours. It was the perfect bait. To them, I was the sentimental fool, clinging to trinkets while my sister managed an empire. It was a role I was suddenly very happy to play. My mother, bless her predictable heart, fell for it completely. She promised to speak to Amelia, assuring me that my sister, in her newfound magnanimity, would surely grant me this small request. 2 days later, I was driving through the wrought iron gates of the Finch estate. It felt different. The air was charged with Amelia's ambition. New, perfectly manicured flower beds lined the driveway, and a team of landscapers I didn't recognize were busy uprooting Grandpa's beloved, slightly wild rose bushes. My stomach tightened. She was already erasing him. They were all waiting for me in the grand foyer. My parents with their anxious, placating smiles, and Amelia standing at the foot of the main staircase like a general surveying her troops. She was wearing a cream-colored power suit that probably cost more than my car. "Brother," she said, her voice smooth and dripping with condescension, "I'm so glad you could come. We were just discussing the preliminary plans for the East Wing renovation." Renovation. The words hit me like a physical blow. The East Wing was the original house. It was the heart of our family's history. It was where the library was. "You're renovating the library?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice even. Amelia waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's terribly dated. All that dark wood and dusty old books. I'm thinking something much more open concept, brighter, more suitable for hosting business partners." I felt a surge of white-hot rage, but I forced it down, burying it deep. I needed to keep playing my part. "Of course," I said softly, looking at the floor. "It's yours now. You should make it your own." I saw my parents exchange a look, pity for their poor lost son. Perfect. "I just wanted to get those albums. Mom said it was okay." Amelia's smile was tight. "Yes, of course. Go ahead, take your time. Try not to get lost in all the nostalgia." She gestured vaguely down the long hall, then turned her attention back to a contractor holding a set of blueprints. She had already dismissed me. I walked down the familiar hallway, my footsteps echoing on the marble floors. Every portrait on the wall felt like it was watching me, judging me. I reached the library's heavy oak doors and pushed them open, slipping inside and closing them firmly behind me. The latch clicked shut, and the sound was like a starting gun. The room was just as I remembered it, a sanctuary of leather, paper, and wood smoke. Sunlight streamed through the tall, mullioned windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny spirits. I breathed it all in, a lifetime of memories flooding my senses. This was Grandpa's room. His armchair was still by the window, a faint impression of him left in the worn leather. I could almost see him sitting there, a book in his lap, looking up to smile at me. This wasn't just a room, it was the last bastion of the man I knew, and my sister was about to bulldoze it. My gaze locked onto the fireplace. It was a behemoth of carved granite, stretching from floor to ceiling, and there, in the center of the mantel, was the stone finch. Its eye seemed to glitter in the light. My heart hammered against my ribs. I walked towards it, my steps feeling both sacrilegious and righteous. I ran my fingers over the cold stone, tracing the familiar lines of the carving until I felt it, a subtle, almost imperceptible outline, the keyhole. My hand was trembling so violently I could barely get the key out of my pocket. The iron felt cold and heavy, a solid piece of the past. I looked at the key, then at the keyhole. This was it. The moment of truth. Had I imagined it all? Was this just the desperate fantasy of a disinherited grandson? I took a deep breath, steadied my hand, and slid the key into the hidden lock. It was a perfect fit. It turned with a smooth, satisfying click, and for a moment, nothing happened. My heart sank. Then I heard it. A low, deep groan from within the stone, the sound of ancient mechanics stirring to life. A faint grinding noise like stone rubbing against stone echoed in the silent room. I held my breath, my eyes wide, as the stone flinched and the section of mantelpiece surrounding it began to slowly, impossibly, recede into the fireplace. It moved no more than a foot, revealing a dark, square cavity, a hidden chamber that had been waiting in the darkness for over 200 years. A wave of triumphant adrenaline surged through me. I leaned closer, peering into the shadows, my mind racing with what I might find: a deed, a different will, a priceless jewel. Just as my eyes began to adjust to the gloom, I heard the sharp, distinct sound of footsteps halting directly outside the library door. The brass doorknob began to turn. My blood turned to ice. Panic, sharp and cold, seized me. There was no time to think. On pure instinct, I yanked the key from the lock. The grinding mechanism instantly reversed, the stone block sliding smoothly back into place with a solid, final-sounding thump. I shoved the key deep into my pocket just as the library door creaked open. Amelia stood there, silhouetted against the bright light of the hallway, a file folder clutched in her hand and an impatient frown on her face. "Still in here?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I thought you were just grabbing a few things. The designers are waiting for my approval on the new lighting fixtures." She took a step into the room, her eyes sweeping over it with a cold, appraising glance, as if it were a hotel room she was about to have fumigated. I forced my heart rate to slow, my breath to even out. I gestured vaguely to a low shelf where some of the older, less valuable family albums were kept. "Just looking," I said, my voice coming out a little hoarse. I cleared my throat. "It's been a while since I've been in here." I willed her to look at my face, at the books, anywhere but at the fireplace. The stone still felt warm to my imagination, vibrating with the secret it had just revealed and concealed. Amelia sighed, a gust of theatrical impatience. "Well, hurry it up. You're holding up progress." She tapped the folder against her thigh. "You know, for someone who never cared about the business, you certainly seem attached to its relics." She looked pointedly at the worn armchair by the window. "I'm having all of this old junk cleared out next week. It'll all be donated, probably. Some of it might even be worth something, if you can find a collector who likes mothballs." The venom in her words was startling. This wasn't just about renovation, it was about annihilation. She wanted to scrub every trace of Grandpa's, and by extension, my history from this place. That casual cruelty hardened my resolve. This wasn't just about a secret inheritance anymore. It was about preservation. It was about defending a memory. "I'll be out of your way in a minute," I said, my voice flat and devoid of the emotion she so clearly wanted to provoke. I grabbed the first 2 albums I could reach, tucking them under my arm as a prop. She watched me. Her eyes narrowed. For a terrifying second, I thought she'd seen something, that some sixth sense for betrayal had alerted her. But then her phone buzzed, and she glanced down at the screen, her expression shifting instantly from irritation to avaricious focus. "Fine. Just make sure the door is locked when you leave," she said over her shoulder, already walking away, her attention captured by whatever multi-million-dollar deal was flashing on her screen. I waited until her footsteps faded down the hall before I let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My legs felt like jelly. I leaned against a bookshelf, the spines of old books pressing into my back. I had been seconds away from being discovered, but I had also been seconds away from finding the truth. What was in there? What was so important that Grandpa had constructed such an elaborate, theatrical puzzle to hide it? I spent the next few days in a fever of research. I couldn't risk going back to the estate, not yet. Amelia was a shark who had scented blood, and my sudden interest in nostalgia would put her on high alert. So I dove into the past. I unearthed the old family journals I had thankfully digitized years ago. I spent hours cross-referencing dates, names, and architectural plans I found in online county archives. I was looking for a ghost, a whisper in the pages that would tell me what my ancestor had hidden. The journals of Alistair Finch I were mostly dry accounts of crop yields and land purchases. But then, in the winter of 1788, the year the library was completed, his entries became strange. They were cryptic, filled with references to a sacred trust and a burden of truth. He wrote about a legacy beyond gold or soil, one that must be preserved from the grasp of the shallow and the greedy. My heart pounded as I read the words. He was talking about the secret compartment. One entry, dated December 12th, 1788, stood out. "The work is done. The Finch's eye is sealed. May God grant my descendants the wisdom to know when to look and the courage to see what is shown. It is a truth that will either be our family's salvation or its ruin." The Finch's eye. That had to be it, the stone finch on the mantelpiece. But what truth could be so powerful? I scanned the preceding pages looking for any clue. He mentioned a falling out with his younger brother, Thomas. The entries about Thomas were filled with anger and betrayal. He accused him of deceit and a heart rotted by avarice. Then abruptly, all mention of Thomas Finch vanished from the family record. It was as if he had never existed. According to our official family history, Alistair I was an only child. My mind reeled. A hidden brother, a family history that was a lie. This was bigger than I could have imagined. This secret wasn't about money. It was about our very identity, the foundation upon which 2 centuries of Finch legacy had been built. And Grandpa had led me right to it. He knew. He must have found it himself at some point. He'd read the journals, found the key, and looked inside. But why hide it again? Why not reveal the truth himself? And why pass the burden to me with this cryptic test? I realized then that the second part of Grandpa's puzzle wasn't just about getting into the compartment. It was about understanding what was inside. He wasn't just giving me an answer. He was giving me a responsibility. I had to go back. But I needed a better plan, a way to get into the library, undisturbed, for more than a few minutes. I needed a distraction, something big enough to draw the entire household, especially Amelia, far away from the East Wing. My chance came a week later, in the form of an announcement in the local paper. Amelia, ever the savvy businesswoman, was hosting a lavish renovation fundraiser for the local historical society, a brilliant PR move to soften the blow of her gutting one of the area's oldest structures. The event was to be held on the estate's main lawn, a black tie affair with a guest list that included every important name in the county. It was perfect. While Amelia and my parents were busy charming donors and sipping champagne on the west lawn, the East Wing would be completely deserted. The night of the party, I dressed in a dark hoodie and jeans, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I parked my car down a service road a half-mile away and approached the estate from the woods at the back, just as Grandpa had taught me when we used to sneak out to go fishing at dawn. The distant sound of a string quartet and polite laughter drifted on the cool night air. The entire west side of the house was ablaze with light, but the East Wing was dark, a sleeping giant steeped in shadow. I slipped through the old, overgrown gardens, my sneakers silent on the flagstone path, the iron key feeling like a cold, heavy weight in my pocket. I knew there was a side door near the kitchens that was rarely locked. As I reached for the handle, a blinding security light flooded the patio, pinning me in its glare like a startled animal. A voice, amplified by a speaker, boomed through the darkness. "This is private property. You are trespassing. The authorities have been notified." My world narrowed to the blinding white light and the disembodied, menacing voice. My plan, so carefully constructed, was about to shatter before I even got inside. But then I saw him. A lone security guard, looking bored and slightly overweight, was stepping out of a small booth near the main driveway, speaking into a walkie-talkie. He was on the other side of the house, drawn by the same distraction I was counting on, the party. The automated warning was just a motion sensor. He hadn't actually seen me. I ducked back into the shadows of the overgrown garden, my heart hammering. I had seconds. The guard would do a slow, cursory sweep of the perimeter. I needed to be inside before he rounded the corner. I darted back to the side door, my hands fumbling with the old brass knob. It turned. The door swung inward with a low groan. I slipped inside, closing it silently behind me, and plunged the hallway into darkness. I was in. Navigating the house by memory, I moved like a ghost through the silent, shadowed corridors. Every creak of the old floorboards sounded like a gunshot in the stillness. I could feel the faint vibrations of the party's music through the soles of my shoes, a surreal counterpoint to the tense silence of the East Wing. Finally, I reached the library. The door was unlocked, just as Amelia had ordered. I slipped inside, closing it gently, and was enveloped by the familiar, comforting scent of old books and leather. Using the faint light from my phone, I crossed the room to the fireplace. My hands were steady now, my panic replaced by a cold, sharp focus. I found the hidden keyhole in the stone finch's carving, inserted the iron key, and gave it a turn. The low, grinding sound of the mechanism was a welcome roar in the silence. The stone block receded, revealing the dark cavity within. The finch's eye was open. I shone my phone's light into the space. It wasn't a large compartment, more like a deep, stone-lined box, and inside there was only one thing. It wasn't a will or jewels or a deed. It was a book, a very old leather-bound journal, its cover stamped with the same stylized finch as the key. Tied to the front of it with a faded silk ribbon was a thick stack of letters, the paper yellowed and brittle with age, and a small tarnished silver locket. My hands trembled as I lifted the items out. I sat down on the floor, my back against a bookshelf, and carefully opened the locket first. Inside were two miniature portraits, painted with exquisite detail. One was a young man with the familiar high cheekbones and intense eyes of Alistair Finch I. The other was his mirror image, but his expression was softer, his eyes kinder. Thomas, the forgotten brother. I untied the ribbon and began to read the letters. They were from Thomas to Alistair, written after he had been cast out. They were filled with anguish and pleas for reconciliation, but they also told a story that shattered our family's entire mythology. Thomas hadn't been the greedy one. He had fallen in love with a woman his brother deemed beneath their station, a woman with no fortune or name. He chose to marry her, forfeiting his birthright. Alistair, obsessed with building a dynasty, saw this as the ultimate betrayal. He disowned Thomas, erased him from the family records, and rewrote history to cast himself as the sole, righteous founder of the Finch legacy. He had built his empire not on ingenuity, but on a lie. Finally, I opened the journal. The first half contained the original, unaltered entries of Alistair I, filled with his bitter, self-serving justifications. But then the handwriting changed. It was my grandfather's familiar, elegant script. He had found this place, just as I had. He wrote of his shock, his disillusionment. He had discovered that the foundation of our family's fortune was rotten. His last entry, dated only 6 months before his death, was addressed to me. "My dear boy," it began, and tears sprang to my eyes. "If you are reading this, then you have proven yourself to be the dreamer I always knew you were, one who looks for the story beneath the story. I am leaving this choice to you, a burden I can no longer carry. Our family's wealth is built on a terrible injustice. Thomas Finch and his descendants were cheated of their legacy. They lived and died in obscurity while we thrived. To give the fortune to Amelia would be to perpetuate the original sin of Alistair, to reward the schemer who sees only power and profit. She is more his heir than ours. To reveal this truth, however, would destroy the family name and create a scandal from which we might never recover. I could not bring myself to make that choice. But you, my boy, you have a stronger heart than I. You see the value in things beyond money. The key opened this lock, but what you do now will be the true test. Whatever you choose, know that I loved you. In that moment, everything became clear. The cryptic will, the strange bequest of records and a key, it was all a test of character. He hadn't disinherited me. He had entrusted me with the family's soul. I heard a sound in the hall, the distinct click of Amelia's heels. She was coming. I didn't have time to hide. I stood up, the journal and letters in my hand, just as the library door swung open. Amelia stood there, a glass of champagne in her hand, my parents flanking her. A security guard must have mentioned the tripped sensor, and her suspicion had finally gotten the better of her. "What is this?" she demanded, her eyes immediately fixing on the open compartment in the fireplace. "What have you done?" "I found the truth," I said, my voice quiet but firm in the vast room. I didn't shout, I didn't accuse. I simply began to read. I read Thomas's heartbroken letters aloud. I read Alistair's cruel, prideful journal entries. And then I read Grandpa's final words to me. The room was utterly silent, save for the sound of my voice and the distant, tinny music from the party. My parents grew pale. Amelia's face, for the first time in her life, was a mask not of calculation, but of pure, unadulterated shock. The foundation of her world, the birthright she had schemed for, was crumbling to dust around her. When I finished, I placed the journal on Grandpa's reading table. "The entire Finch fortune," I said, looking directly at my sister, "is built on a lie. It belongs, by right of blood and justice, to the descendants of Thomas Finch." "That's absurd," Amelia sputtered, finding her voice. "It's ancient history. It means nothing." "It meant something to Grandpa," I said softly, "and it means something to me." I turned to my parents. "Did you ever wonder why Grandpa spent so much time on genealogy websites? He wasn't just looking back. He was looking for them." On the last page of Grandpa's journal was a list of names and addresses, the result of his search for Thomas's lost line. They lived a few states over. A family of teachers and mechanics, living simple lives, completely unaware of the legacy they had been denied. The fight went out of Amelia. The truth, undeniable and backed by our own ancestors' hand, was too heavy for even her ambition to bear. In the end, there wasn't a dramatic court battle. Faced with the evidence, with Grandpa's clear intentions, and with the threat of a public scandal that would obliterate the family name, my parents, and even Amelia, had no choice. Lawyers were involved, of course, but the outcome was inevitable. A trust was established, and the vast majority of the Finch fortune was legally and quietly transferred to its rightful heirs. I met them a few months later, Thomas Finch's descendants. They were good, humble people, bewildered and overwhelmed, but incredibly gracious. The first thing they did was establish a major charitable foundation in the name of the ancestor they never knew. As for the estate, they decided to donate the historic East Wing Library, and all to the historical society Amelia had been so keen to impress. Amelia left. She took a small portion of the money that was left to our branch of the family and moved to Europe, wanting nothing more to do with the name she felt had been tarnished. My parents and I are talking. It's slow, but for the first time, they're seeing me not as a disappointment, but as the person who saved the family from its own lie. I didn't take any of the money. That was never what it was about. I did keep Grandpa's records and his tools and the old iron key. I live a simple life, but it's an honest one. Grandpa called me a dreamer, but I think he knew that sometimes dreamers are the only ones who can wake a family from a nightmare that has lasted for centuries. He didn't leave me a fortune. He left me a purpose. And that's an inheritance you can't put a price on.